Operator, or could you help me place this call? See, the number on the matchbook is old and faded. She's living in L.A. with my best old ex-friend Ray. Gosh, she said she knew well and sometimes hated. Isn't that the way?
And I apologize to people of a certain age who will now have that song stuck in their head for the rest of the day. But ain't that the way it seems to go? All right, so we're doing a show today about hotlines. Actually, our producer, Callin McEnroe, she floated this idea with us during her job interview. And when she did, I mean, she was talking about, as you will see today, all kinds of permutations of the idea of a hotline. But I was sort of thinking about the idea of a hotline, like what it is, why it's called a hotline. And it struck me anyway, as a child of the Cold War, that I wasn't actually created by the Cold War, but as a child who came of age during the Cold War, that a hotline might have originally been a phone sitting on a desk, and you pick it up, and it only goes to one place. Because there was this, you would see in movies a phone in the White House, and the president picks it up, and it connects directly to the Kremlin. And I assume, anyway, that's where my kind of entrenched idea of a hotline comes from. But it turns out that there's actually a what is a hotline that you can call. So, Kat, let's call that right now.
Welcome to the What is a Hotline hotline. The What is a Hotline hotline is sponsored by Audacious with Chion Wolf. Tired of shows where some old guy goes on and on about whatever? Try Audacious with Chion Wolf, Saturday mornings at 10. Originally, a hotline was a direct point-to-point link between two phones. Although the most famous hotline connecting the White House to the Kremlin was never a big red phone like you see in the movies, it started in 1963 as teletype, then moved to fax machines, and is now a secure computer link. These days, people use the word hotline to refer to any phone service dedicated to a specific purpose. The preceding message was brought to you by Audacious with Chion Wolf. That's Audacious with Chion.
All right, she said that too many times. I'm hanging up. All right. But that's interesting. And so here to shed more light on sort of what the nature and history of the hotline, which is essentially, I think, the history of the telephone to a certain degree, is Dr. Lee Humphreys, a professor of communication at Cornell University. Welcome to our conversation.
Thank you. I'm very excited to be here.
So is there some kind of working definition? There are a lot of things these days that call themselves hotlines. Is there, in your universe, a working definition that applies to the ones that are and the ones that aren't?
I think the one that we just heard from What is a hotline is actually pretty accurate. I might expand perhaps a little this idea of any phone service dedicated to a particular service. And so often we think of voice as being essential to a hotline. But one of the things we've seen in with the rise of mobile phones is, of course, texting hotlines. And so I think, there's a sense of immediacy and immediate service or assistance that is associated with hotlines and helps to distinguish it from other kinds of services.
Now, the hotline probably owes its rise to the end of a period, the early period of telephone use, in which there were operators with switchboards plugging jacks into holes, right? There was, because in a way, for a long time, there was somebody that you could talk to right away. It was the operator who had another different job to do, but people routinely talked to that person for whatever reason, right?
Yes, the operator for a very long time served an incredibly important role in the use and I would say widespread adoption of landline phones, certainly in the United States. My colleague Josh Lauer at the University of New Hampshire says the operator was the internet before the internet. So you could pick up the phone and talk to an operator and find out the weather, find out the time of day, find out, election results. And so the operator was both a person who could help you connect to other people, but also someone who was a source of information themselves.
Yeah, and there were sort of off-label uses for the operator, right? Including, I mean, like people could use them, would try to use them even as baby monitors, right? Going to leave the phone there next to the baby.
Yes, there are certainly examples of particularly well-to-do women using the operator as a remote babysitter of sorts, where they would leave the phone off the hook and say, "Call my friend if the baby wakes up," and then they would go over to their friend's house to have tea together.
Hopefully tea.
Yes.
So yeah, and this kind of, there was sort of that. And then the other thing that created a live interaction with a person that you didn't know was the answering service. And once again, like young people, I was old enough. I remember when phone exchanges were like Adams 32498. And I remember answering services, which is a human being who would pick up the calls of somebody, and you could talk to that person and try to persuade them, maybe even to track down the person whose answering service they were. And all of this kind of led to a lot of pop culture stuff, ranging from, the musical and movie Bells Are Ringing, which is about an answering service and a person who gets way too involved with the people calling the answering service. And of course, Lily Tomlin's iconic Ernestine, the telephone operator, who would always say, have I reached the person to whom I am speaking? But now this is sort of, I think, a person in their 20s who got anything resembling a phone operator would be pretty weirded out by the idea of interacting with a human being.
Yeah, I mean, I think, one of the most interesting trends that we see is, certainly in mobile phone studies, is that people do not answer telephone calls from someone that they do not recognize the number from. And they will only answer a call if they know who it is. And even then they'll often screen their calls. But that has been a significant change in mobile phone practice. Whereas, historically, if the phone rang, you answered it no matter if it was during dinner. I mean, some families might have particular rules about no phones at dinner, but generally, if a phone rang, people feel compelled to answer it, even if it's not their phone. And that has been a huge shift with the migration to mobile phones.
So in the 1980s, party lines started to fade away. I mean, people started to have their own phone number and their own phone exchange. I would assume that's maybe kind of around the time that the idea of a hotline began to arise. You had your phone, nobody else could use it. Maybe you would call somebody for something. Is it right around then that we start to see maybe more of a proliferation?
So, I mean, there's different kinds of lines. So, it's important to think about some of your listeners might remember 900 numbers that people could call, which would also be, I think, a form of a hotline. Of course, customer service numbers, 1-800 numbers, I think would be considered a form of a hotline. And then things like 411, 911, I think, are also considered forms of hotlines. And 411, the rise of it really came with the idea of it's automating the operator. And it was considered information, and then it was considered directory assistance. So it wasn't until the early 1990s that the U.S. government actually outlawed 900 numbers, particularly ones that were related to sexual content. And yet a number of other services you could call and hear your favorite musical artist talk about, what they were doing. And those really came to a stop in the early 90s when they became more regulated by the U.S. government.
Psychics also were a pretty big thing.
Indeed.
And probably that government intervention saved the storefront psychic, because if you could just, charge it to your credit card, why ever leave the house unless you're not going to have an accident because you talked to a psychic. So we should talk a little bit about the idea of people who do call a hotline to talk to someone who's staffing the hotline. These might be crisis or suicide-related hotlines or hotlines where you can get advice. And there's something, And you mentioned text hotlines at the top of the show, but there's a way in which the voice is really important, right? The kind of connection. You and I can't see each other right now. We're making a connection through voice. And to me, that seems intrinsic to this concept.
Absolutely. I think there's a sincere feeling of intimacy that comes from hearing one's voice and hearing someone else's voice respond to you in ways that text cannot quite get at. I think another really interesting element of why, for instance, we're not seeing as much a rise of video is because there's a sense of when you don't have those additional visual cues, all you really have to rely on is the audio cues. And with that, though, it can be kind of freeing because you're not worried about what you look like or what other people are perceiving about your looks. And therefore, there's a kind of, again, intimacy that comes from that. The other really important, I think, difference between a voice connection, a phone call, and texting has to do with this concept that we in the field of communication call synchrony. And synchrony is a kind of communication that requires both parties to be active at the same time. Messages won't wait for one another. And of course, there have been changes in phone with answering machines and answering services. But generally, if you miss a call, you don't get to hear someone's voice. And while texting can provide a near synchronous experience, it's not the same as sharing that moment with that person. And that synchrony also significantly can add to a level of connection and trust and intimacy.
Yeah, I worked for 16 years in a more conventional kind of talk radio environment where phone calls to the show were a really big thing. It was a live show, people calling in. And there's a way in which I think people are both vulnerable at that time. And people who are calling a crisis line or a suicide hotline or something like that, they're obviously in a very vulnerable state. But there's also a way in which they feel less vulnerable because they can isolate to the voice. It's what you're saying, too. There's a way in which you could be a total mess, but at least you can talk to somebody and they don't necessarily see everything about that.
Right, exactly. And there also can be an anonymity that goes along with that, right? And I think that idea of being anonymous and getting help means that you won't then necessarily have to see that person the next day and explain how things are better or worse or whatnot. And I think that is also really freeing and liberating for people to share, sometimes in their most vulnerable and difficult times.
So just to kind of wrap up here, every conversation of any kind, for some reason or other, these days has to include some anticipation of the role of AI. So, obviously, we're starting to see some of the sort of conversational capacities of AI, ways in which it really can mimic this cadence and style of human speech, ways in which it can read cues. An AI is essentially a predictive engine. It looks at a lot of stuff and matches it up against other stuff and predicts what should happen next. But I'm wondering about sort of, the loss of the human element in some of the scenarios we're talking about.
Yeah, I think I would be very hesitant to replace hotline crisis workers with AI. But I do think there could be a role for technology in helping to assist people who might be at risk. People who have had previous hospitalizations, people who have sort of opted in for additional support or help to identify at-risk behaviors where it might trigger someone, a counselor, a family member, someone to reach out and check in with someone. So I think that there could be an opportunity, but I think the human element and sense of connection is, we're in a loneliness crisis in this country. And I think AI is not going to replace that. And I think human connection is what brings us meaning and that's not going to go away.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like, it could almost work for something like the Butterball turkey hotline or something like that you could talk to an AI about the fact that your turkey's on fire, probably about as easily as you could talk to a human being, except that the person who calls that thing is in the middle of making Thanksgiving dinner and it's not working out and their family's coming over. I'm not sure they want to talk to a machine even in that kind of a situation.
Yeah, I mean, certainly if it's on fire, we don't want them talking.
Okay, that was a bad example. Extreme example.
I'm thinking of all of those, backyard fried turkey fires
Right.
that happen. But I do think, I think there are certain kinds of information that can be accessed pretty quickly and easily that can help people. And again, we see this with things like Google and other services that are trying to both predict what kinds of information you want, as well as potentially what kinds of information you need. And so there's a certain element of that. But at the end of the day, again, I think there are real connections that come from talking to other people. And, it's hard to know if someone's Thanksgiving dinner, do they really need advice on how to cook the part of the turkey that didn't burn? Or do they need someone to say, you know what, holidays are really stressful and family can be really stressful and it's going to be okay and I will listen. And so I think there are multiple needs that hotlines offer that I don't think Google searches and AI can necessarily provide.
Well, Dr. Lee Humphreys, it calmed me right down when you said those words, and I don't even have a turkey fire active right now. Dr. Lee Humphreys is a professor of communications at Cornell University. We'll take a little break. We'll be back with more Hotlines.
Hi, Nancy. Hi, Helen. What's the story? Fun and glory. What's the tale? Nightingale. Tell me quick about Hugo and Kim. Hi, Margie. Hi, Alice. What's the story? Fun and glory. What's the word? Hummingbird. Have you heard about Hugo and Kim? Did they really get pinned? Did she kiss him and cry? Did he pin the pin on? Or was he too shy? Well, I heard they got pinned. I was hoping they would. Never living at last. Going steady for good.
Oh, Mr. Hankel, this is Harvey Johnson. Can I speak to Penelope?
True about Kim.
Penelope?
I just knew it somehow.
About the prom.
Nintendo of America used to have a hotline you could call for help when you were stuck on a hard level. By some accounts, 800 enthusiasts applied to be game counselors when the hotline first opened, and only 33 got the job.
Since its launch in 1981, the Butterball Turkey Talk Line has received more than 3 million calls from panicking home chefs trying to serve Thanksgiving. No, David, you can't cut your turkey with a chainsaw.
You used to call me on my cell phone, late night when you need my love. Call me on my cell phone, late night when you need my love.
That, of course, is the Drake song Hotline Bling. But who knows what Drake means when he says hotline? He's Canadian and weird. I don't know what a hotline means to him, but I do know that we've gathered up some pretty interesting examples of people developing the hotline into something that it maybe had not been imagined before. And one of those examples comes from our next guest, Jessica Martin, an artist who heads an art program for Westside Elementary in Healdsburg, California. She's also the co-creator of the Kids Advice Hotline Peptoc, and that's Peptoc. That could be important. So she joins us now. And first of all, welcome to our conversation.
Thank you. I am so thrilled to be here.
Well, we'll try to maintain that state of enthusiasm as much as we possibly can. So you took an idea to a group of kids between, I think, the ages of 5 and 12. First of all, explain to us how you explained to them what you had in mind.
Oh, yes. Well, when I'm working with kids, a lot of my work as an artist, I'm really interested in really thinking of a broader definition of art beyond drawing and painting, and how can a conversation between two people be art? And so that's something I've talked about with the kids quite often. And over the years, they've gotten quite comfortable with this kind of broader definition. And so I went into the classroom with my friend and fellow artist, Ashera Weiss. We were going to do a poster project based on all of this incredible advice that we've listened to the kids as they support each other during the class and as peers. And we said the world really needs to hear from you. And we'd like to make some posters and have you write some words down. Think about someone, if you're having a bad day or if someone else is having a bad day, what's something you could do or say to them to make them feel a little better.
Now, this arose at least partially from your own childhood, your own life. I also grew up in an era where you could call a number and get the correct time. Apparently, the number you dialed was popcorn, wherever it was that you lived. Tell us about popcorn.
Popcorn, I loved popcorn. You could call it it would tell you what the time was in Pacific Standard Time. And I thought that was the most exciting thing as a kid, and I would call it all the time. It was exciting to be able to get what the time is other than looking at a watch or a clock.
Yeah, and this is before we had cell phones that were bouncing off of satellites and kind of knowing geo time or something. Particularly when the power went out or some clock needed to be reset, you called that because you knew it was right. It was the closest thing you could get to a mutually agreed upon time in those days. And it was sort of, I remember being a kid and it was like an adult voice, and it sort of thought, well, I'm talking to an adult about something that's very important to both of us, what time it is.
Yes.
So, and there was something about just being a kid and using the phone and all this stuff. So you start Peptoc, and you're actually asking students to make these hotline recordings. And maybe maybe the best thing we could do, Kat, we're going to go to B1 here. Let's go to B1. Let's kind of just hear a little bit of how the kids process this mission, and we'll talk a little bit more about what happened after that. So let's go B1.
When you're feeling mad, you should take 3 deep breaths and think of things that make you happy. The thing that makes me happy is when, and I think of happy things will happen in the future, like going to a friend's house or a cousin's house. Bye.
If you're frustrated, just take 5 minutes off.
If you're frustrated, you can always go to your bedroom, punch a pillow, or cry on it, and just go scream outside. If you're nervous, go get your wallet and spend it on ice cream and shoes.
Out of the mouths of babes. And so, I don't know, maybe just talk a little bit about the overarching concept here. Presumably, mostly it's going to be grown-ups calling this Peptoc line. And why would it work to have kids say the things that you hear them saying here?
Oh, there's so many layers to that question. I'm thinking a lot about what you were talking about with Dr. Humphreys before about this idea of intimacy, about hearing a voice speaking directly to you. That was a major motivation for me to start this hotline. So while the kids were making posters, I recorded their voices, saying what they said on their posters. And I get to hear kids every day because I work with them. And I still, after all these years, think they're absolutely adorable and also incredibly powerful and wise. And I think that not enough people get to hear that. And so this was a way to share my experience and to share their voice.
And some of the things that the kids said were either profound or poetic. I mean, there was a kid who said, if you're feeling up high and unbalanced, think of groundhogs. I mean, that's like Emily Dickinson or something. It just...
He is kind of an Emily Dickinson as a person. I asked him about it later and he said, I don't know, it just came to me. It just right at the moment. That's just what I wanted to say. I just think that kids' ability also to just think right on the spot and improvise is different from an adult. They just let their unconscious completely come out front and center, which is another great thing to witness.
Yeah, I think the sort of the no filter aspect of this makes the advice feel a lot more heartfelt and less calculated. So you started this thing up, and I think your idea was, 100 people will call or something. That's not how it went, right?
No, not at all. So I said I've always wanted to do a hotline as an artist, and this was just such a great opportunity. It felt like the right fit finally, and I really just made this for our community. This was in the middle of COVID, and just right after lockdown, and it just really felt like something for our own community. And we also hung the posters all over town. And then 3 days later, I coincidentally launched the hotline the day that Russia invaded Ukraine. And 3 days later, we were getting 60,000 calls an hour, and I had to switch the hotline provider so that I could have someone who had a larger capacity. And that continued on and continues on now, even after a little over a year now. We still get surges. Just a few weeks ago, we got 2.4 million calls in 48 hours.
Now, not to make everything about money, but initially this thing was pinned to your credit card in some ways, in such a way that you accumulated charges for the existence of this thing.
Exactly. Yeah, the backstory is pretty wild with this. I mean, it's the story of going viral, I suppose. Within those 3 days, I just had put it on my credit card, my personal credit card, just to, I thought it would maybe be $100. And I looked at my credit card and I had $48,000 on my credit card. And I had to do some quick thinking and find friends of friends and friends who knew someone who's wealthy enough to be able to sponsor us. So fortunately, I was able to find that for a few months.
Now, the other person who was possibly inconvenienced all of this, I believe, was named Tim in South Carolina. Tell us about him.
Poor Tim. Tim called me. So pretty much the day that I saw that my credit card had $48,000 on it, I also got a message from a guy named Tim in North Carolina saying he was getting 2,000 calls a day. And it was from people misdialing our number. So I had to quickly also switch our number to a different number and let everybody else know that. And he still gets surges of calls, and I hear from him every once in a while. But I'd like to make a public acknowledgement to wonderful Tim for being so understanding.
Yes, absolutely. So, I mean, some of the feedback you've got here is pretty amazing. I mean, first responders, nurses working in elder care, there are people who have told you that these messages somehow or other saved their lives. Yes,
we do know that for a fact. We've gotten letters saying that it saved their life that day. That was certainly not something that I was thinking of when I first launched this, and it really makes me feel that it's this really tremendous responsibility to keep this thing going as long as we can, even though it still is pretty expensive.
Yeah, I mean, you are kind of facing a Rubicon here, right? And just in terms of, I mean, the volume is still pretty high, 15,000 calls a day, something like that. And I guess it spikes at times of discernible reasons for anxiety and maybe slumps a little bit when people are feeling less in need of consolation or whatever it is that they're getting from there. But it's still costing money. Yeah, and my understanding also is that some people call up. I mean, they know what messages are preloaded there. I mean, all of these things. You might quickly mention what the categories are. Categories, the thing that you can ask for. What categories do they fall into?
Sure. Yeah, I took all of the kids' messages and then I sorted them into categories. So you press 1 if you're frustrated, and you press 2 for general life advice. 3 is just a pep talk from the entire kindergarten class. And then 4 is the children, the kindergartners just laughing. And which was a hilarious story also, because I tried to get them to laugh and I was telling them a story that I thought would be funny. And then it turned dark really fast. And the kindergarten teacher saved me and was able to get them to laugh and let me record them. And then the 5th one, we did pep talks in Spanish. And then there's another one that says, kids are telling you how awesome you look. And then we have a bonus advice section.
So, and apparently people know what's there now. I mean, there's been so many tens of thousands of calls to this line, and they know what they want, right? People say it's like a number 3 day.
Yes, absolutely. People say this is absolutely a number 3 day or a number 4 day. I got to hear those kids laughing. This is what's happening. Or people will tell other people, you need to press number 1. If you're too frustrated, you better go call that and press number 1.
All right. When we see that, by the way, we're wrapping up here, and I'm also being informed by Colin McEnroe that I'm way lowballing this. It's 11 million calls. But if people want to run up the bill even more, call for yourself. It's 707-873-7862. That's 707-8-PEPTOC. Peptoc. I think that was more confusing. We'll post it up on our website. And there's also an option to donate if you want to see this very interesting service keep going. This is a fascinating thing. I would not have guessed that it would do what it has done, but you've been a wonderful reporter on it. Jessica Martin is an artist who heads the art program for Westside Elementary in Healdsburg, California, also the co-creator of the Kids Advice Hotline Peptoc, Peptoc. Thanks for being with us today.
Thank you very much for having me.
All right. We're going to hear about another kind of hotline right after this.
Are you a Callin Oates fan? Try Callin Oates. That's right. It's a hotline that will play a Callin Oates song to you over your phone. This line has been putting a Sarah smile on callers' faces for over a decade. Call 719-266-2837 to try it out.
You can follow The Colin McEnroe Show on Facebook or Twitter at Colin McShow. Make sure you never miss an episode by subscribing to or following our podcast on any podcast app. It's free. You don't have to wait an hour after eating before you go swimming. That's just something our mothers believed. Back to the show.
In 1955, a misprinted Colorado Springs newspaper accidentally told scores of children to call a top-secret military hotline asking for Santa. The mix-up led to the creation of the now famous Santa tracker that's run to this day by the North American Aerospace Defense Command, NORAD.
And we are back. Time to thank our technical producer, Kat Pastor, who's pushing all these buttons right now and making all these phone calls happen. And we also want to thank producer Colin McEnroe. We get some extra help from Frankie Graziano, Sabrina Herrera, Jonathan McNicol, and Chion Wolf. You've heard some of their voices already on some of these hotlines. And, of course, Lily Tyson is the senior producer and is, walking around being a senior producer and doing things that senior producers do. Don't ask her any questions, all right? She won't answer them anyway. All right, it's time to talk about one more really kind of innovative idea that kind of flips the hotline concept in a whole different direction. And we're going to talk about that now. So you heard Jessica Martin, she recorded kids. You call the hotline, you hear these kids recorded. But what if you didn't didn't really actually have to pick up the phone and call. What if something else was happening? This is a hard thing to explain, but here to explain it is Danielle Baskin, an artist in San Francisco who co-created Dial-Up, a voice chat app that connects you to strangers. This has a very simple concept. Every day you receive a phone call from a stranger somewhere on Earth. There's no video or pictures or anything like that, just a voice, somebody else who signed up for the app. So, first of all, Danielle Baskin, welcome to our show.
Hello, it's wonderful to be here.
So, where did this idea come from?
Dial-Up started as just a way for me to stay in touch with friends. It's kind of terrifying to call a friend. You think you might be interrupting them. You think they might perceive it as an emergency. So me and a few friends, created this system that just called us and connected us. So we wouldn't have, any reason to call a friend, and catching up with people is really wonderful. But we decided to expand our friend group and invite friends of friends. And we noticed that strangers connecting with each other actually produced these wonderful calls.
So what happens is you sign up for the app, you get a call every day, but you also sign up for a category, right?
Yeah.
Quarantine chat, poetry, local politics, relationship advice, full moon. Full moon means you only get a call at the night of a full moon. Yeah. So are those like really crazy calls, or is that just an unfair characterization of full moons?
Actually, full moon is one of the most popular ones. So it calls every time there's a full moon, and it tells you to go look at the moon, find a window, go outside, and you're connected to another person, usually in your time zone. Though the other topics, there's probably like 30 different topics.
Wow.
And we try to connect people in different locations too.
So, yeah, we're going to hear a little bit about that in just a second from one of your app users who lives in Indonesia. I recorded that conversation a little while ago. But it seems to me, one of the other guests talked about loneliness. And I think, this is very much a response to loneliness, but also maybe a response to shyness too, right? There are people in our lives that we know we should call, or we want to call, when you want to stay in touch. I want to stay in touch with my friend David from high school, but when am I going to call him? And is it going to seem kind of stupid? And in the era of text too, there's this idea that you text rather than call. That way the person has the opportunity to decide how much of an inconvenience you are, or something along those lines. But this sort of solves the whole problem, right? I didn't initiate the call. You didn't initiate the call. The app decided we were going to talk to each other.
Absolutely. So it sort of imitates running into each other. And those sorts of moments are delightful when you either, you run into a friend on the sidewalk, or you're, waiting in a line and talk to a stranger. So it sort of recreates that effect.
Right. And I think also there's the sense not only of shyness, but I think there's the other thing, and maybe this was the thing that impelled you to do it first with your own friends. Like, if you don't work hard to maintain a relationship, if you don't think, you know what, I'm going to call Bill right now. No, I'm not going to call Bill because I'm busy right now. And maybe he's busy too. It isn't indifference exactly, but it's something like just something that slips through our fingers and we don't do it.
Totally. Yeah. I think we're afraid of interrupting people. We're afraid of our own standing. Like, am I that close enough to this person to call them? And I think there's also some anxiety of like, oh, what should I even talk about?
Exactly. All right. Well, let's hear, I think you'll enjoy this too. Let's hear a little bit from Michelle Rorong, an architect in Indonesia who used Dial-Up to talk to people during the quarantine. This is C1 Cat. So let's begin by setting the scene. You were living with your parents during the lockdown, the pandemic lockdown. So that meant you had people to talk to, but it didn't really give you a chance to meet people that you didn't know.
Yes, it's true.
So explain what happened with Dial-Up.
So I particularly just want to talk to other people in the world about this quarantine. So I sign up and I choose the quarantine segment. They have a lot of segment for a call, and I wait for a call.
I want you to tell us about some of the people who called. I think you had your longest conversation with a woman named Joyce. Tell us about Joyce.
Yes, she lives in Philippines. We kind of have a long talk with her. Just a funny one, as I'm an introvert, she's like always ending the topic with something funny. We talk a lot about what we're going to do in this pandemic. She lived by herself, so she have no one to talk, but she liked to chat with her friends too. So we talk a lot about movie, a lot about travel experience, and more. There's some people that I have a deeper connection. We talk a little bit more, longer time, which is actually, I never really have a talk that long, like 2 hours call. I just do it like with my best friend, maybe. For strangers, it's kind of like a rare thing to do.
You're an introvert. And I'm wondering what it's like to sign up and just knowing that any moment the phone could ring and a stranger will be calling you and somehow you're going to have a conversation. Did it make you nervous?
It did make me nervous. It's kind of hard for me too, but I kind of need that kind of thing. I need to do something out of my comfort zone during the quarantine. So it kept me going to the live at that certain time. It is kind of hard, but over the time I kind of get used to it because the conversation just flow.
You had what, somewhere between 8 and 10 conversations on this dial-up app, right?
Yes, it's true. Yeah.
And did you sort of get better at making, I don't know, we call it small talk here, and it's not just small talk that you were making. You were talking about real things, real experiences that you and the other person had. Did you decide that maybe you were a little bit better at conversation than you might have thought?
Yeah. Over the time, maybe in the first phone call too, it's kind of hard asking a question, small talk, what should I ask? But when I get to it, I'm getting used to like, oh, well, we have to start this conversation with this, and it will go flowing to this and this. It's helped me a lot.
Right. You're not having to be locked down now. I assume you can move about the world pretty freely. Do you feel like you're a little bit different from the dial-up experience?
Yes. It makes me feel like I don't really have to be scared to strangers. It's like, oh, okay, it's fine to talk to them, and going trip with strangers, it's fine. It doesn't have to be like scary or anything. It could be just more fun, and actually it's fine to do. Like a lot of people do it.
So I want to hear from you, Danielle, what you're thinking about what you just heard from Michelle.
That's so cool that that this experience of Michelle talking to 8 to 10 different people made them less afraid to talk to strangers. I mean, that's a desired effect. I think people have a lot of anxiety about what should I say, what should I ask, but actually when you're paired with another person, you both have this curiosity. And it kind of does flow naturally. I think the scariest part is deciding to pick up the call.
Right. I think a lot of people would hesitate maybe, but it also does seem as though you invented a life preserver during a flood, right? I mean, this thing was made for the pandemic.
It was made before the pandemic, actually.
But I mean, it
really took off. I mean, I think a lot of people during the pandemic, especially those who lived alone, they weren't talking to anyone, and going on the internet isn't a substitute for conversation. So people would spend a lot of time with each other on the phone, and you could get up to around 3 different calls a day. But some people used it every day and met hundreds of people. And people would stay on the phone for a long time. I think the longest phone call we had was 11 hours. So just spent the day together.
And people fell in love too. There's sort of I read the Modern Love piece. I mean, there is sort of a Cyrano de Bergerac quality to this, or the pen pal or something like that. That idea that you meet somebody first through their words, through their voice. You might interact with them for many, many, many hours before you know what they look like. And in a way that maybe defeats certain expectations and sets up other better ones.
Oh, absolutely. I think what's kind of cool about dial-up is nothing about them. You're not going to look at their social media profile and have an idea of a kind of person they are or their lifestyle. It's sort of whatever they choose to reveal to you. And that actually helps. Well, it removes judgment, and then also you really get to know them So
yeah, I mean, the modern love piece, I think the woman's talking about the fact that she's picturing, because the guy lives in Amsterdam and bakes bread or something, this kind of blonde, sort of, I don't know, sort of wet world Viking kind of guy. And turns out was kind of chubby, but he really knew how to talk about bread in a way that was really great. And it really suggests, once again, the idea that these telephonic things, they restore, I think, a missing level of intimacy. First of all, we should say you used this thing that you invented during the pandemic. I mean, what was your overall experience having the phone ring and having it be a stranger?
Oh, it was incredible. I mean, I got to learn what was happening in the world from direct sources of, people living in different cities. Just like outside of the news cycle, I just got these amazing stories, but also I really felt like I could talk about whatever was on my mind, right? Like I wasn't, trying to be a specific persona. I wasn't, it wasn't like networking. It was just kind of like talking about feelings. And in that way, it felt, extremely therapeutic. And I met so many interesting people. There's, everyone has, I think every human has like stories and an incredible life if you ask the right questions. And sometimes those stories haven't appeared anywhere else. Maybe they're not, a podcast guest, or maybe they don't have a blog, or maybe they don't write about all their stuff, but they just have fascinating and inspiring stories. So I just loved meeting new people.
Yeah, I think also we've been working for, I don't know, it seems like 8 years now on an episode about this thing called Dunbar's number, which is this idea that we have as humans, the cognitive capacity to maintain about 150 meaningful relationships. But this is sort of like, well, what if you wanted to add a 151st person? Where would you get that person, and how would your existing life support it? But this is, it's sort of short term enough so that you can do it. You can do it for an hour and then move on. It's fascinating. Danielle Baskin, we're going to have to go, but we love your concept. It's called Dial-Up. It's still going, right? What do people have to do Dial-Up?
If you go to dialup.com, that's just one word, dialup.com, you can get the links to download the app. It's on iOS and Android. It is free. It's still going. There's thousands of people who are still using it. And we'll run it. I don't know for how long, but it's still up now.
All right. And you can go to our website if you want to see the portrait that Michelle of Dial-Up made of Joyce, the person that she was talking to. That's at ctpublic.org/Colin. Thanks to everybody who listened today. And obviously, we have to go out with some Callin Oates.
Welcome to Callin Oates, your emergency Callin Oates helpline. To hear one-on-one, please press 1.